This lesson will cover the rhetorical triangle and discuss rhetoric. And rhetoric is a term that you may not know much about, but entering into college, it's something that you should consider, something that you should be aware of, because a lot of schools teach rhetoric in an English 101 or 1101 course. This demonstration will help you become familiar with the terms and the terminology. What is rhetoric? Sometimes we hear rhetoric thrown around in a number of ways. Usually it has a negative connotation. Oh, it's just a bunch of rhetoric. He's just using a lot of rhetoric. Rhetoric is actually a term that has been around for thousands of years. And just to try to put a definition to it, many people have attempted that. Plato said that it was the art of winning the soul by discourse. Quintilian says it's the art of speaking well. More recently, Andrea Lunsford says it's the art, practice, and study of human communication. Basically, when we're discussing rhetoric, just know that it primarily means communicating effectively and persuasively. And when I talk about rhetoric, I'm going to focus more rather on writing and how it applies to writing. But any type of communication employs rhetoric, and it's all about how effectively we communicate and how persuasively we communicate. Anytime we present any information, we want someone to see our side of things. So consider that as you go forward, because that's the element. That's what rhetoric means. Now, rhetoric is comprised of a couple of components, and we call that the rhetorical triangle. We credit Aristotle with developing this concept of the rhetorical triangle, and that means that if these three basic components are introduced into writing, if we keep in mind these things when we communicate, then we will have an effective and persuasive communication. And the rhetorical triangle is comprised of the three parts, which are ethos, pathos, and logos. And it may be difficult to understand what those mean because they're in Greek. But if you look at the words, you can almost see a connection to an English word that they would be tied to. Logos, for example, may look like logic to you, and it does have something to do with logic. Ethos, possibly looks like ethic or ethics, so it's tied to that word as well. Pathos, if you look at the word, you see sympathy or empathy, pathetic, those type of words that are all tied to emotion, and that's all tied up in that word as well. Well, logos actually means the word or logic. We consider it to mean organization. Ethos means our credibility, how believable we are with our credible and logical information. Pathos is emotion, the emotional connection that we establish with our audience. So I want to go through each of these components and discuss them with you. If we're talking about logos or organization, how do we incorporate that into our essays or into our writing? Well, if we have to consider that it's got to be communication delivered in an understandable format. Now, the most primary and basic understandable format of communication is that we need to have a mutual language. We all want to communicate, in this instance, in English. If you clicked play on this message and it started speaking German or Chinese, and you didn't understand either of those languages, you would be left out. So we need to decide on a common ground format, the common organization format. And the first thing we need to decide is the mutual language. In addition to that, we need to think about using that language, using the standard conventions of grammar and mechanics within that language. And that's why you take classes that focus on, how to understand subject and verb agreement, how to, construct sentences that make sense to other people, because you want to be understood. That's the whole point of, the early English classes that you take. You also want to have a properly organized essay or communication. And so think about the 5-paragraph essay model that you had in high school. I sometimes call that the training wheels version of writing, because it's a basic formula that everyone knows to follow, and it's one that everyone builds from once they learn and master that 5-paragraph model. And that model consists of your introductory paragraph, usually one paragraph, that has a thesis statement, and the thesis most often comes at the end. Then you have 3 body paragraphs that follow, and within each of those body paragraphs, you have a topic sentence and supporting evidence built into those paragraphs, and all that information goes back to defend the thesis statement. And then you conclude with a conclusion that sort of re-emphasizes your thesis or explains how the information proves the thesis that you presented originally. So if we use those components, we're going to have strong organization within our essay. We're going to have good evidence of logos. Ethos and credibility, they are arrived at in a number of ways. The one that seems most basic to people, when we're thinking about what gives us authority to write about a particular subject, if you're a college student, you don't have a degree yet in a particular field, so you may feel like you don't have the expertise needed to speak on a subject. If you have an essay topic that you're writing on and you aren't sure about the topic or the subject matter, you have to rely on other people. So you want to get professional views and expert opinions of others. And when you have that information, then you can go forward and use that to substantiate or to back up the things that you have to say in your paper or in your writing. You may do that by finding articles published in professional journals or other credible locations. That's the main thing, is it has to come from credible sources. It has to be someone, if you're writing about organ donation, you want to go to a website that talks about organ donors that's a reputable site. Maybe there's an American site for organ donation or the American Red Cross. Any of those, but something that's considered reputable. You might also conduct interviews with professionals in the field, or any type of interview. If you're writing about your company and your company's wanting to know what the best forms of merit increases would be in people's salaries. If we can't give people money, we want to give them something else. They send you out to interview everyone in your department or everyone in your office to find out what each person would like, and then you come back with that information. Well, that's credible information. That gives some authority. You've talked to all of these people. You may interview a scientist to discuss something that's going on with the science essay that you're writing. It's all about finding who has the authority and conveying the information that person has into your writing. You could do professional surveys or statistical analyses. If you're trying to find, for example, your essays on how many people donate blood each year in the United States, then you might go to the American Red Cross website, for example, to find that information, the statistical analysis of that. On average, how many people are male, how many people are female. If that information is important to your essay, you would include it there. Personal experience is something that people often shy away from when we're talking about credibility. And I think it's because in high school, a lot of times professors or teachers will tell you can't use I in an essay. Don't use your personal experience. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. If you have special knowledge on a subject from which others may benefit, then you might be better served as an authority on that subject matter in your essay and talking about it with establishing your own credibility. Or perhaps you have experienced something that gives you a higher level of authority on the subject than the average person. Then you may have something credible here. You don't always have to have a degree in a field to have experienced it. If you're talking about traveling to Jamaica and the benefits or the great things you can do, and you go to Jamaica regularly, then you have some expertise and authority to tell someone else, well, here's the things you might want to do. Here's something you may want to try while you're in Jamaica because I've done it. And if you've done it, that gives you some credibility. Examples of ethos within an essay, including the material that you obtain from reputable sources. That's a quote from a professional in the field that you obtain through your own research and or interview. Including statistics obtained from your research. The main point of in this is that it's research. You have to do your own research to obtain the credibility if you don't have it within yourself from personal experience. Sharing your own experience is another example of it. So you may explain your personal connection to the subject matter. You may demonstrate your expertise. A great essay I always talk about. Several years ago, I had a student who had a really bad reaction to medication, to a particular brand of medicine that was still on the market at the time. And she wrote her essay about the damages that medication did to her body. Well, she's an expert on that. And as you read that, you identify with her because you understand she knows what she's talking about because she experienced it. So that gave her credibility, the ethos that she needed to make her essay believable and credible. Pathos, or the uses of emotion. When we're talking about that, pathos is less about inciting a specific emotion, and it's more about establishing an emotional connection with your audience. So it's about connecting. You want to know who your audience is so you know what to say to them. The more you know about your audience, the better you'll be able to relate to that group. Or if it may be an individual person. But the more information you know, it helps you build your essay or your communication so that it's delivered specifically to them. And with effective use of pathos, you can appeal to your audience and identify with them better. Without that, sometimes, have you ever received a form letter in the mail and you can tell there's no personality behind it? It's just a chain letter that's been sent to you. It's been sent to 500 other people. There's nothing in it that connects or relates to you. Think about how that compares with another letter that you might receive from home, from your mom or your dad. And the letter, and think about the content and how it'll be more personal. There'll be more of an emotional connection to it, and you're more inclined to read that. Well, that's what you want to try to incorporate into your own essay. And to do that, you have to know the audience that you're sending the information to. Some examples of pathos, know the characteristics of your audience. Know the age group, the education level, the social background. Think of the elements of what you're talking about first, and then think how that information can be tailored to suit the audience that you are addressing. You always want to establish some common ground. Sometimes you're going to communicate with people who will not agree with you, and going in that they don't agree with you. And that's okay. The point of developing an argument or developing a good communication, isn't always about agreeing on both sides or agreeing with the other person, but we can establish common ground that we can begin from where we can begin. If we have common ground, we can start there, and then we can move into other issues that might be a little less agreeable. Always avoid offending your audience. And if you know who your audience is, then you can always know how to avoid offending them. Because once you've offended someone, it turns them off completely. They're not going to listen to you anymore. So you want to be certain that what you do is constructive in the way that you deliver your information, and that it's in no way going to offend the audience that you're targeting. I always use the example, you wouldn't start off with a group of vegetarians or vegans by talking about, how great the burger was you ate last night. Or you wouldn't want to try to sell a group of vegetarians or vegans, 50 pounds of beef if that's the intent of your communication. You should know to begin with, this isn't the right audience for the material that I have. I have to move on. You always want to keep a balanced triangle. The rhetorical triangle, effective rhetoric involves maintaining a balance of that ethos, pathos, and logos. And if you get those out of kilter, if you get them unbalanced, it's going to cause problems. If you overemphasize one aspect of the triangle, you're going to have an unbalanced argument or unbalanced communication. If you fixate too much on logos and organization is important and it needs to be addressed, but if you only worry about being well organized, you're going to leave out the aspects of having good credibility and a good emotional connection, and as a result, you're going to lack content. You're just going to have sentences on the page that really don't mean anything. It may be written very well, but it doesn't say anything that's productive. If you have too much ethos, then it's going to minimalize your pathos. And once you do that, you're going to lose all emotional connection to your reader, and you're going to bore your audience. Think about your class textbooks. How many of you go home at night and read the textbook for some enjoyment? Very few of us, I would think. And that's because textbooks are more driven on delivering total ethos, total credibility. It's information and facts over and over and over again. The textbook is less concerned that you like it or that you're in agreement with it. It's just giving you information. And think about how boring that gets if you have to read it all the time. But if you have an introduction of pathos and a balance of that, then there's a good mix of emotional connection and the credibility, and that keeps people from becoming bored. Too much pathos, on the other hand, will minimalize your ethos, and once you've done that, you've omitted your credibility. And when you omit credibility, you move away from presenting the facts and the logic, and you risk being too emotional. And nobody wants to read something that's a guilt trip or something that's going to just play with their emotions without giving them any solid facts. A lot of people, you can incite riots because people are easily, motivated by emotion. And if you don't have any facts behind it, you can sometimes make someone so angry that they have a negative or really adverse reaction that's not motivated by any fact whatsoever. It's just by pure emotion or rage. You want to avoid that. And to do that, you keep a nice balance of pathos and ethos and logos. So here are some points to remember. You always want to have an awareness of rhetoric because it can help you communicate more effectively. The organization, credibility, and emotional connection to your audience are important to consider as you write. It's not something that you set out whenever I start writing an essay, I don't think, okay, what's my ethos, pathos, and logos? But it's good to be able to identify it within your writing to know what's weak and what's strong within your paper, what you need to tweak. A balanced use of ethos, pathos, and logos will strengthen your communication. Once you're able to identify, maybe you create arguments that are too emotional and lack facts. Or maybe it's so factual that you're not thinking about your audience and trying to connect with them. So once you can get those things in check and you know how to identify it, then that's going to strengthen your writing. If you want more tips on improving, you need to continue on to the next presentation, which is on communicating effectively.